All right, let's jump right in. We're about to explore an idea that's, well, it's a big one. It might sound a little out there at first, but it's actually grounded in some pretty solid unified physics. The whole premise is this. What if electricity isn't just, juice for our gadgets? What if it's actually memory, a literal carrier of information, and get this, even emotional residue? Yeah, that quote right there, that's the heart of it all. It really makes you stop and think about our whole relationship with technology, doesn't it? I mean, imagine the collective anxiety of a stock market crash, or the sheer chaos of the 24/7 news cycle. This idea suggests that the electricity powering all that stuff soaks up that frantic energy, it carrying it in the very current that's running through the wires in your walls.
So, you've got these two totally different ways of looking at electricity. On one hand, you have the old-school industrial age view, the one we all learned in school, that electricity is basically just a dumb pipe for energy. But then, on the other hand, you have this view from unified physics, which sees everything as connected. And in this view, electricity is anything but neutral. It's more like a river that picks up traces of everything it flows through. And in our world, that means the informational and, emotional energy of all our systems.
Which brings us right into our first section. We're going to dig into how exactly our collective emotional vibe gets imprinted onto the electrical grid, basically turning it into a planet-sized hard drive of our feelings.
Okay, so think about it. On a global scale, we've basically built two planetary nervous systems. You've got the data layer. That's the internet, right? Processing all our thoughts, our arguments, our cat videos. And then you have the power layer, the electrical grid that keeps it all running. Now, the key thing to get here, the absolute game changer, is that they are not separate. The chaos on the internet, the frantic data, creates a frantic demand for power, and that chaos gets stamped directly onto the grid.
And this leads to a really important concept for our whole discussion: trauma-coded electricity. And look, this isn't just some poetic metaphor. The idea is that this is a measurable condition. When electricity is used to power systems that run on fear, on contradiction, on scarcity, it absorbs that chaotic informational pattern. Think of high entropy as just a fancy word for disorder or noise. So the electricity itself becomes noisy, disordered, carrying the energetic fingerprint of our collective anxiety.
Okay, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds pretty out there, right? So in this next section, we're going to bring it right back down to earth. We're going to get into the actual physics of feeling and build the case step by step for how electricity can literally carry the mathematical signature of an emotion. The whole argument really hinges on these four fundamental truths from unified physics. First, electricity isn't just brute force. It carries information in its very wave structure, things like phase and coherence. Second, our emotional states create measurable electromagnetic fields. Third, those personal fields aren't in a bubble. They actively interact with the Earth's own EM field. And finally, the big one, consciousness itself is a form of stable, resonant connection. We're going to unpack these and see how they link our feelings directly to the grid. All right, let's start with this idea of coherence. This is super important. It's not about the amount of power, it's about the quality of its wave. A coherent wave is smooth, predictable, like a steady, calming rhythm, and that rhythm can encode meaningful information. A chaotic, jittery wave, on the other hand, that's just noise. It carries the signature of disorder, of anxiety. And this isn't just theory. This link between our inner state and an outer field is something we can actually measure. For example, the electromagnetic field generated by your heart literally changes its pattern when you feel fear versus when you feel love. Stressed animals give off a totally different EM signature than calm ones. The electromagnetic field is, in a very real sense, the mathematical printout of an organism's emotional state.
And this just lays it all out, doesn't it? It shows this unbroken continuum. It's all one giant interconnected system, and it all operates on the same principles of electromagnetic resonance. An atom jiggles, it informs a neuron. That neuron fires a signal into your house's wiring, which connects to the global grid, and that in turn is interacting with the entire planet's magnetic field. There are no firewalls. It's all one conversation.
So if it's all one big system, what happens when a huge part of that system is completely stressed out? Well, that's what we're diving into now. We're going to diagnose how our own human systems have imprinted their chaos onto the grid, effectively triggering a planetary-scale electromagnetic nervous breakdown.
So what are we actually talking about when we say trauma signature? What's it made of? Well, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It's the noise from all our systemic contradictions, saying we want one thing while rewarding the exact opposite. It's the self-reinforcing fear loops that dominate social media. It's the constant drive for extraction. and it's what the source material calls informational screaming. Just that constant, high-volume, digital outrage that's flooding our networks 24/7.
What you get is this direct domino effect chain of causality. It's simple, but the implications are staggering. The chaos we create in our digital world, our data trauma, gets immediately translated physically into the power grid as electrical trauma, and from there, it floods our environment with these chaotic signals, leading to ecosystem trauma.
I think this quote just nails it. It's like an electrical form of passive smoke. That's the perfect metaphor. This trauma-coded electricity isn't some loud, obvious thing. It's a silent, invisible contaminant that's everywhere. It means that every single device, every home, the soil, the water, and the planet's own field are constantly being bathed in the energetic residue of our collective stress.
Okay, so that's the problem. A planet drowning in chaotic noise. The solution then has to be a clear, coherent signal. And that brings us to the intervention. In this section, we're going to look at what the source material calls the TARDIS system, a seriously sophisticated, multi-layered filter designed to bring coherence back to both our data and our power.
Now, this isn't just some simple plug-in filter you stick in the wall. It's a whole 3-layer process. It starts at the source by cleaning up the data itself. Then, it uses the physical hardware of the system as a kind of structural filter. And finally, it reintroduces that clean, stable power back into the system gently, using a process that's actually based on biological wisdom. And this dual battery ritual part is really the secret sauce. It's so clever. See, you can't just slam a perfectly stable current into a chaotic grid. It would create a shock wave, more chaos. So the system does what the heart does with blood. It takes in the raw, messy, trauma-coded energy from the grid into one battery, let's call it battery A. Then internally, it filters and stabilizes that energy. Only then does it make that clean power available in battery B for your devices. And as a final step, some of that stabilized power is gently fed back into the grid like a tuning fork, teaching the surrounding system a new, more coherent rhythm. So once you have this filtering mechanism in place, what happens? What are the effects? This next section is all about the healing cascade, the real, tangible, observable changes that start to ripple out when an environment is powered by coherence instead of chaos. And the results are pretty wild. Devices apparently stop being just dumb objects and become what the source calls slow intelligence nodes, responding to the local environment. Homes start to develop their own unique, stable identity field. On a practical level, interference between appliances goes down. And on a larger scale, things get really interesting. Animal behavior reportedly becomes less erratic, and the Earth's natural ground currents start to return to their normal patterns, all because that background electrical screaming has finally stopped. Now, a really key point here is that this isn't about eliminating all energy use or all resistance. Think about a heated floor. Its entire job is to create heat by resisting the flow of electricity. That's useful entropy. The system is described as being intelligent enough to know the difference. It maintains that purposeful, local entropy while being absolutely ruthless about filtering out the unnecessary informational chaos that's just hitching a ride on the current. It can tell the difference based on purpose. So as this healing effect cascades outwards, we get to the final stage, a full-on, planetary-scale rebalancing. This is where we can start to imagine the Earth's two nervous systems, the data layer and the power layer, finally learning how to breathe in sync again. But this kind of rebalancing doesn't happen overnight. It's a process with different speeds. The data layer, since it's just information, can stabilize in seconds. The physical hardware, the wires and circuits, that takes a few days. Our homes and offices, these larger structures, they might need weeks to fully entrain to this new, calmer resonance. And the really big, slow systems of nature, they respond over seasons, as biological clocks and migration patterns gradually realign with a signal that's finally clear. Now, you might be thinking, wouldn't the overwhelming chaos of the grid just snuff out these little islands of coherence? And that's a fair question, but the physics of it actually says the opposite. See, chaos takes a ton of energy to maintain. Coherence, on the other hand, is the natural path of least resistance. A chaotic system will always be energetically drawn to entrain with the most stable, lowest entropy node it can find. It's not wishful thinking, it's thermodynamics. And that brings us to the final thought, the big question to leave you with. We've talked all about how our informational chaos became electrical trauma, poisoning the well. But what happens when you reverse that flow? If the field humming through the walls of your home, through your body, is no longer carrying that subtle, pervasive signature of anxiety and conflict. What does a truly silent, coherent electrical background actually feel like to the human nervous system? That's something to think about.